مرحبا، أنا اسمي محمد المصري، باحث في المركز العربي للأبحاث ودراسة السياسات. أرجو أن أرحب.
Hello, my name is Mohammad al-Masri. I'm a researcher at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Study. I would like to welcome you this second session of the Winter School of 2021. As Dr. Dana has alluded to, the Winter School has been dealing with research studies for the PhD holders and the PhD students for the last few years, and we tackle issues that are pertinent to the Arab world and the Middle East. This year, this session will tackle the issue of the state through different components and different axes that have been alluded to by the abstract of the Winter School. Again, I would like to welcome you for the first day of the works of this Winter School, and I would like also to welcome our followers, the followers of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and those who follow us through social media, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And we hope that you will derive a great benefit from this lecture. This lecture presented by Dr. Wajih Kawtharani, who is a historian and an academic from Lebanon. His career is lengthy in the academic circuits. He is a visiting professor at the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and he used to be the director of the Arab Research Center in Lebanon, as well as the director of the scientific section of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He was also the head of the reward given by the center itself, especially when it comes to the social sciences and humanities. He taught in the Lebanese university, and he has a PhD from the Sorbonne University. He had published a number of publications, titles, and books. I cannot go through all of them, but power, society, and political action was one of his books, as well as the Levant, demography, politics, and economy, in addition to the jurist and the sultan, the memory and history, and other titles. Dr. Wajih will be talking to you in Arabic, and as my colleague Dana, those who like to listen to the English, they can press the icon interpretation and then English. And this lecture will be streamlined in Arabic through the icon that says Spanish. Dr. Wajih will be talking to us, and when sectarianism and leaders are transferred into becoming a mediator between the citizen and the state. This is the title of his lecture. You have 45 minutes, Dr. Wajih. Please, the floor is yours. Could you unmute yourself, please? Could you unmute your microphone, please, Dr. Wajih?
Ibrahim can unmute him automatically. Okay.
تفضل دكتور وجيه، نحن يفترض نسمعك.
شكرا دكتور محمد.
Thank you, Dr. Mohammed. Thank you, Dr. Dana, for the introduction. I would like to thank those who are in charge of the winter school. At the outset of this lecture, I would like to touch upon two historic events that I consider precursors to the establishment of a national state in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon amongst the Arab elite. It is a commonplace to say that Syria is a term, Greater Syria, included Lebanon as well in the past. Going back to history is nothing to do with interpreting the present through the past or being anachronic. However, it is to do with following the genealogy of understanding the phenomena of our present day. Following this epistemological framework, I touched upon two events that are precursors of what followed. The first one is the declaration of the Constitution of 1908, the Ottoman Constitution that had led to suspense among the Arab elite, whereby a constitutional Ottoman kingdom can see the light. A constitutional Ottoman kingdom, whereby the Sultanate, the Ottoman state, can be transformed into an Ottoman nation or Ummah. And Ottomanism can be transferred from a ruling family into a nation state, i.e., in Latin, nationality, nationality. This nationality, in accordance to the Ottoman constitution, was to do with the loyalty to the Ottomans. And this procedure had theoreticians and proponents from both Turks and Arabs. From Turks, I would like to mention the poet and the man of letter Namiq Kemal. And Namiq Kemal is mentioned in the emergence of the Turkish state by Bernard Lewis. And in accordance with my work, Sata al-Husr, another man, an intellect, an Ottoman who transformed himself into becoming a nationalist, an Arab nationalist, following 1922. And he wrote 4,000 papers in the archive of Istanbul that have not been translated into Arabic or are not translated into Arabic yet. So he was a theoretician indeed, with two faces, if I might say, before 1927 and after 1927. The other issue is to do with having an Arab nation state that supplants the old sultanate that was entrenched in history. The second event is to do with 1920s San Remo that led the Santiago Conference that led to the mandate of France and England or the UK in Iraq and Syria, in certain Arab territories. And to this end, it is feasible to say that the Lausanne Treaty in 1920 supplanted the third 1920 treaty, and that was quashed or abolished by the Kemalist Turkish Revolution. And it was Lausanne, I mean, the foundation of the demarcation of the borders between the Republic of Turkey and Iraq and Syria. In addition to that, and this is very important, that historians do remiss, it was a document of the declaration of the principle of nationality in the would be countries. Unlike the collective Arab memory and its reiteration, a baseless reiteration of talking about the Sykes-Picot Treaty as a reminder of a tragedy that was not implemented. The Sykes-Picot Treaty was not indeed implemented, albeit all the Arabs talk about the 1916 Sykes-Picot treaty or accord, and there was a tragedy, a media tragedy that every Arab was concerned about as far as the Sykes-Picot accord or treaty is concerned. Accordingly, the Lausanne Treaty is similar to the Westphalia European 1648 treaty that dealt with the issues of sovereignty, the sense of belonging, as well on a par with the Lausanne Treaty, because they both are similar. So Lausanne talked about the loyalty to the Ottomans that the elite or the Arab elites were thinking of, and poems were, as a matter of fact, composed by Shawqi and Rasafi about the nostalgia or the Ottoman constitution. There's Anis al-Maqdisi that who has a book that is called the Arab Modern Poetry, and there are plenty of snippets that deal with the articles and the poems that praised the Ottoman constitution at the time. I came across a beautiful paragraph for for Sulaiman al-Bustani, the one who translated the Odyssey and the Iliad. And Sulaiman al-Bustani was a parliament in the Ottoman Assembly, and he kind of was an Ottoman. In 1876, this assembly was established, and then it was obstructed by Abdul Hamid, and then it was reinstated again. So this gentleman, Al-Bustani, had an article in place, and he talked about the Ottomans before and after the constitution. And he thought of the Ottoman constitutional kingdom that might morph into a nation state, the like of Britain and the like of the other monarchies in accordance with their constitutions. And he was thinking of the Ottoman monarchy to be transformed into a nation state. But because he was a member of the assembly, he criticized the political life at the time, i.e., the life that he had lived and the lay persons had lived and their perspectives. So he says the test or the experience of the establishment of the First Council in 1876 proved that all the subjects thought that the leader was an elected official, regardless of the procedure. Indeed, the letters in some of the governorates used to come with different demands, an influx of letters that had plenty of grievances. One would ask for an accolade, another would desire a certain gift, and the third would ask for a third desire. One gentleman had lost his donkey, and he sent a letter to the governor for his donkey to be returned to him. To this extent, these kind of letters included a number of demands that were outlandish. So this reflects the relationship between the governor and the subjects of certain governorates or provinces during the Ottoman Sultanate. So indeed, this had led to a clientelism kind of uh, 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 system, and al-Bustani alluded to this very fact in this text. Years following this paragraph or this text, I would like to ask, can we apply this to the Lebanese case? Can we apply clientelism to the Lebanese situation? Michel Shiha comes to mind here because he followed closely the establishment of the Lebanese constitution in 1926, and he was uh, of the people who followed closely the independence of Lebanon as well, and he had put into place a book entitled The Internal Politics of Lebanon. Years following the independence of Lebanon, we notice that there is a polarization or an alignment perhaps between destitution and hope as far as the Lebanese constitution is concerned, that goes back to 1926. He says, we, or I say that we take note that there is a contradiction in what he wrote, uh, because his kind of writings swing between despair and hope. He wonders, would it be possible for the Lebanese to become a citizen, or do we think that the Lebanese would still will still be a subject or a client? Michel Shiha uses different kind of terms. Uh, can the Lebanese stay as clients, or will they become citizens? This is the question. In 1950, Michel Shiha literally speaks about the manipulations and the maneuvers of the politicians in recruitment, in the manipulation of the ballots, whereby the parliamentarians follow the whims of the subjects. Mashelshi has said that if this degradation will still go on, then this country won't have any political future. And this goes back to 1950. In one article entitled Freedom in February 1950 as well, he declares the return of feudalism. The the feudalism that goes back to the Sultanate of the Ottomans, and he expects that the historians of the future, away from being lenient, they will be more harsh, they will be harsher than the politicians of the 50s and the men of letters of the 50s. So Michel Shiha expects that we will be perhaps harsher than him in the past. And I, as a researcher, as a historian, can comment by saying the following. It seems that our experience with the political elite is more ominous and more bitter and more gruesome than she has experienced. Because the problem is still going on and it has escalated in the 60s and in the 70s when Elia Hariq, the prominent researcher, studied the political life as well in the 60s and the 70s of the previous century. In his book, Who Rules Lebanon, in 1972, this book was published. He thought of the representation, he thought of the role of the powerful people and the overlap or the intersectionality between the leaders, the executive branch, and the legislative branch. The parliament overlaps with the executive branch, and there is no separation of power because the leader would become a leader or a quasi leader in accordance with his or her allegiance to his or her sect through the corridors of the government itself and through providing money and services to his or her loyals, albeit he or she would have the lion's share of the booty. So we understand that there is a structural kind of or a systemic system, and I underscore the word system, and I borrow it from Hassan al-Qbaisi, the splendid translator. So the system can, as a matter of fact, be used in Arabic. Sistema yusistimu. So the word system itself in English can be Arabized, can be used as an Arab term, I suggest. But anyway, the parliamentarian layperson's relationship has become a systematic relationship rather than being just a relationship between a loyal and a leader. So here comes confessionalism, sectarianism, as well as clientelism. So these two kind of elements do overlap in order for this relationship between the parliamentarian or the leader of a certain sector and his or her subjects to continue. I'll move now to the propensity of the formula of militias following 1975. The formula of militias and the establishment of the one ruling party. Following the 1975 civil war, we had witnessed a number of prominent militias that played a major role in Lebanon. The state has crumbled, and the clout of the uh, uh, families or the prominent families receded. Raymond Iddi, for example, uh, resigned from a his political function, and accordingly, as the decline of the leaders was a fact, the sectarian militia kind of alignments surfaced at the time. The every single sect had a party, and there were efforts to do so. And I think there was another element that has been added to clientelism and confessionalism, i.e., the overlapping and the multilateral kind of leadership. What I mean here by the third element is the protection or to have a cover into place to protect all the subjects who belong to a certain sect against any other sect because of the fears that were spreading across the land, especially as far as the Sunnis are concerned, and the Christian Maronites and the Shiites as well, who suffered from persecution in the past and wanted to entrench their position through Amal movement and then Hezbollah. So these fears dominated the political landscape following the Ta'if Accord, whereby a solid sectarianism would surface, a closed one, as I call it. At the time of the traditional leaders, confessionalism or sectarianism was kind of loose, was overlapping as far as clientelism is concerned, because the leaders of the sects liaised with each other. However, following the Taif Accord, clientelism was more entrenched, especially as far as the leaders of the sects are concerned. So no Maronite can have a job unless he or she has a patronage or a connection with another Maronite. And this applies to the Shias and the Sunnis as well. And here, what I call the solid or the closed sectarianism or confessionalism. But before 1975, the confessionalism kind of or sectarianism was of a different face, was different. Shaman, for example, a Christian, can provide service to a Shiite, or Kamil Hussein, for example, or another Sunni leaders would, for example, provide services to certain Christians. But following the Taif Accord, the sectarianism was more entrenched, more ominous, more fierce and harsher. In the 90s,
In the 90s, and according to the Ta'if Agreement in 1989, some sort of a civil peace was imposed and a state of balance with the regional and international forces was created. And this settlement, known as a Ta'if settlement or a Ta'if charter, guaranteed the rights of different sects and confessions, what was Islamic, Shiite, or Sunni, especially when it comes to expanding the powers of the prime minister at the expense of the president and expanding the powers of the parliament as well as other steps like drawing plans for canceling confessionalism and amending Article 95, which guaranteed equal share and quotas to different confessions and developed the University of Lebanon, also unifying books in the curricula and other things we don't have the time to delve into the details of. There were committees formed for rewriting a new history for Lebanon and amending the school curricula. And so there are some who saw in the Taif agreement side for reform, and others saw it in a totally different light, and which went against the grain of the agreement itself when it came into implementation. So, despite the calls for reform contained in the Taif agreement and which became part and parcel of the constitution, the three jobs for the jobs of prime minister, president, and speaker of the parliament and distributing them to the three main sects in Lebanon, which was part of the tradition and norm, was to be understood in a different light now, and went into separation of the powers, and under the influence of the Syrian army's presence in Lebanon, was understood as a troika, three party heads, i.e., the president to be a Christian Maronite, the prime minister to be a Sunni, and the speaker of the parliament to be a Shiite. The differences between them used to be sorted out away from institutions through agreement and exchanging concessions, and or through the interference of the Syrians and their role in bringing together and closer the different positions. Of course, this interference had always its negative side, and this meant that there would be a quota for the Syrians, a quota for the different ministerial posts, and this Syrian patronage was a role in establishing a network of loyalists and supporters and voters, etc. Secondly, the Israeli invasion and occupation of part of Lebanese territory, including Beirut, the capital, has launched an armed nationalist resistance in and different sects of nationalist powers took part in, including some secular nationalist forces. But this resistance, with the ascendance of Hezbollah, with the support of Iran, when Khomeiniism was raising the slogan of exporting the revolution, and with active Syrian support, because the Syrian regime at that time was raising the slogan of the intertwined two uh, paths or tracks, meaning that liberating South Lebanon goes hand in hand with the liberation of the Golan Heights. So, this wide ranging nationalist resistance movement has turned gradually into an exclusively Shiite resistance under the leadership of Hezbollah, or an Islamic resistance under the leadership of Hezbollah, through a series of small wars waged between brothers and partners, like the war in the refugee camps, the war with the socialists, with the Derzi faction under Walid Jumblat, the progressive socialist, and the war with Amal and Hezbollah. Also, all of these conflicts was a way of preparation for making the Southern Front an exclusive front for Islamic resistance under the leadership of the Hezbollah. In a nutshell, we can say that among the most important results as the outcome of a 30 years of history, this can be divided into two chapters: the chapter of the civil war and the chapter of the Syrian domination, which led to a collective memory about each sect or confession needing or requiring a protector, and acting through consolidating its position through placing its representatives in the positions of power. With this old tradition of protectionism, which started the third chapter after the assassination of Rafiq Hariri. After the assassination of Hariri and the withdrawal of the Syrian forces and the different outcomes and the 1559 resolution by the Security Council, then the differences surrounding the International Tribunal, which have not ended until now and are likely to cause more rifts and divisions until the recent sentences passed by the court or tribunal against a member of the Hezbollah of being responsible for the assassination. All of this has led the political scene pertaining to different confessions in Lebanon looks like a scene which is a cause for pain and feeling or having a tragic feeling towards it. As a conclusion, we can say that a new political Sunnism and Shiite politicalism have been produced, which started acting like political parties with their own nominees to the parliament, and they have names that they proposed for the government or the makeup of the cabinet. When a president is elected, this election comes with a mentality of who the sect which represents the majority in the confession will be the president, and he who represents the Shiite majority will be Speaker of Parliament, and the Sunnis will be Prime Minister. Saad al-Hariri yesterday said he is a natural nominee because he represents the Sunnis, and this is a dangerous and this is a huge leap because this means the different confessions have changed into different political cantons within the system. This approach, in my opinion, leads to deepening a system of confessional clientelism, which moves from individual rentier services to a state of bias towards the confession or religion. And this makes the citizen no longer exists as a legal entity with rights and duties as known, and this will be at the expense of the state when each party is linked to a regional or international party, and this can make it impossible now to form a government because everybody is waiting for the Iranian American solution to enable the formation of a government. As for the Christians and the Maronites in particular, it's difficult to apply the same analysis similarly to what the Sunnis and Shiis have accomplished because they know who the prime minister is. Saad al-Hariri, the speaker of the parliament, is known, but the Christian situation is different. It's more difficult because Aoun became president because he represented he claimed that he represents the Christian majority, like the situation with the Shiites and Sunnis. Like the Sunnis call Saad al-Hariri their representative, the Shiites Nabih Berri as their representative. But Aoun does not represent the true state of affairs so far as the Christians are concerned, because and in the Christian camp there is more diversity, in fact, unlike the Sunni or Shiite scene where there is almost no diversity. In the Christian case, there is real diversity. This real diversity could have played a more positive role if it wasn't for the fact that they uh, moved closer or tried to bring closer the Sunni politicalism and the Shiite politicalism, but they moved closer to the Shiite camp through the free national trend with Hezbollah and their alliance with their Hezbollah. And although it's now weaker, and through this is similar to Ja'ja with the Sunnis alliance. So there is a Christian Sunni alliance vis-a-vis a Shi'i Christian alliance, and this has been playing a negative role by and large until now in the Lebanon. The Christian diversity, especially that, in my opinion, the Christian civil society is more diverse and develops a lot more than its Sunni or Shiite counterpart. And unlike what was happening in the 70s, when the civil side in the Islamic camp, in my opinion, was bigger. Today, the civil movement in the Christian community is bigger now. And it seems that the political diversity and in the Christian community can be developed to bear fruit in the secular political activism in Lebanon. This party, bipartisan or partisan in the Sunni and Shi'i camps, and the exclusive nomination of who becomes prime minister for the Sunnis and speaker of the parliament for the Shiite has given General Aoun a pretext to claim this role, which he plays and fulfills until now. And that is to say that there is an exclusive confessionalist role for the Christian community as much as for the Shiites and Sunnis, and because he claimed to be the strongest in the Christian community, and his party is the strongest. And this is a direct result of the mentality prevalent now, and really expresses a kind of political confessionalism, and no longer represents the old tradition of political activism for the different confessions, and similar to the role of the Sultan, because what has been achieved in the Sunni community and Shia community remains problematic in the Christian and specifically Maronite community, because this community has the kind of political diversity that cannot be settled in favor of one particular party. This could have been a positive situation, if it were to be developed into a general situation and was amended and reformed through a secularist, modernist, like this is what Sami Jumail tries to do now to present himself as a political party, but the problem is the phalangists have their own problems because the general political scene in the Lebanon, because, which is governed by the two major Islamic forces, uh, cannot accept a change towards a more secularist approach because the reality of the situation is we are moving towards more uh, division and makes everybody think that the power comes not from the right of the constitution or the citizens' rights, but through the right of the sect and confession. And this even applies to the street movements, like the latest wave was 17th October movement, where many hopes were pinned on, but uh, the pinning hopes on it did not take into account the political clientelism built into the political system now and the nature of the political classes ruling in Lebanon. I'll close by saying that the hope to have a protest movement similarly to what happened was always hindered because of the lack of a program of demands and the lack of a representative leadership. There was no real representative leadership with a manifesto which represented the demands of the people. For this reason, the leaders of this movement or agitation movement justify that because they are above and beyond any wishes to have power or enjoy power, and they only said that these are the demands of the general masses and the people, and this enabled the ruling powers to penetrate the movement. Amongst the other obstacles for this civil movement was the participation of some ruling parties, some confessionalist parties, through managing to apply pressure on each other to achieve more gains for themselves and hinder any real reformist movement and link that with the regional and international powers, especially that most of the problems have not been solved, like Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. So these factors have acted as a hindrance in the Lebanon, and this could have made or created the kind of change desired, but on the contrary, the clientelism, the confessional clientelism, in which drove Lebanon into almost bankruptcy, is not just a shallow ideology, it's a political, cultural environment or construction which uses very active mechanisms in and through their followers can stand up to any foreign bodies that they did not like and they wanted to resist. And when Corona came, it was an even a bigger obstacle. Thank you for your kind attention. These are just some observations I have gathered through my following up of affairs in the Lebanon since the 70s of the last century, and I collected from different articles I have written, and these articles I have collected them as they are without any changes and included them into a book about the crisis of democracy in Lebanon. We find in this book more details than what I had time to go through today. Thank you very much, Dr. Wajih. And on behalf of all our participants, our researchers and participants in our winter school, I would like to express our thanks to Dr. Wajih and his informative talk about clientelism and the relationship of it with confessionalism and the impact of that on the state in the Lebanon, and his contribution, I'm sure, can open the doors to a wider discussion to analyze the state of affairs in the Lebanon or any other Middle Eastern country or any other country in the world for that matter. This can be one of the useful approaches, and I'm sure will be revisited and commented upon in our papers to come. For the lack of time, there will be no questions and answer session because we will start the following session at 5:30, but I urge all of our participants in the winter school, if they have any questions or comments, to direct them to us in the winter school, and we will pass them to Dr. Wajih, and he in time will respond or take them into consideration. Now, I would like to inform you that the lecture is over. We have a 30-minute break. We will start at 5:30 Doha time with the session headed by Dr. Dana Al-Kurd at 5:30 Doha time, 2:30 Greenwich Mean Time. Thank you very much.